The Italian Wine Podcast is the community-driven platform for Italian wine geeks around the world. Support the show by donating at ItalianWinepodcast.com. Donate €5 or more and we'll send you a copy of our latest book, My Italian Grape Geek Journal, absolutely free. To get your free copy of My Italian Grape Geek Journal, click Support Us at ItalianWinepodcast.com or wherever you get your pods. Grazie mille. Official media partner, the Italian Wine Podcast, is delighted to present a series of interviews and highlights from the 2023 Wine to Wine Business Forum, featuring Italian wine producers and bringing together some of the most influential voices in the sector to discuss the hottest topics facing the industry today. Don't forget to tune in every Thursday at 3 p.m. or visit theitalianwinepodcast.com for more information.
Okay, hello everybody. My name's Stevie Kim. We are back. I'm coming back from Sardinia. Before that, I was in Monferrato. Tomorrow we're leaving for Colia. It's a very, very busy wine season here. Someone actually asked the jingle intro, the sip, swirl, and spit, that intro that we do for the Clubhouse. That is actually written by Margherita Andreanacci. She was one of our podcaster before Joy. Before Joy, there was Margherita. And she actually has an album out. She has a single out on Spotify if you want to go check it out. It's a little dark. She's not very jovial, but I think she's very talented. Her name is Margherita Andreanacci, and she have a new song out now. She just drops a single. It's called Acqua Sale. And then she has some other stuff, but check it out. I know some of you have asked, so I thought I'd bring that up. And let's give a little follow to Margherita Andreanacci, if you will. Okay, so that was that. And this instead is Clubhouse, Italian Wine Room it's called. It used to be a house. I kind of liked it better when it was Italian Wine House. We are nearing 100 episodes, 150 episodes. We've been doing since the pandemic. And this is what we call the Ambassadors Corner, where one of our Italian wine ambassadors at large invite their favorite wine producer, and they get to do more like a fireside chat style interview with one person. And it's a very popular show for us. So let me welcome our host today, Brittany Tangora. Ciao, Brittany.
Ciao, Stevie. How are you?
How are you? Brittany, of course, is our newly acclimated Italian wine ambassador from the New York edition recently.
Yay. Happy to be here.
Ciao, Brittany. Congrats.
Thank you.
Listen, Brittany, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. So my name is Brittany Tangora. I am a certified sommelier and a newly inducted Italian wine ambassador. I'm so happy to be able to say that. I've been working in wine since 2017, and I've definitely found my little niche within the Italian wine world. It's certainly what I'm passionate about. Currently, I have a side business called Wine With Britt, where I host private wine tastings for everyone who loves wine in any capacity and wants to learn more about wine. I even have a specific tasting that is just specifically all Italian wines, which gives me the most pleasure for sure. And I would say that my goal is to move to Italy, hopefully sooner than later, and be able to introduce people around the world to smaller wineries throughout the country that they wouldn't otherwise get the pleasure to get to know.
Oh my goodness. So another one. You want to move to Italy?
I sure do.
Where are you living now, Brittany?
I'm currently in upstate New York.
Whereabouts? I mean, we're not going to come and look for you anything.
Yeah.
I've been watching a lot of dark series on Netflix recently, but yeah.
I'm in Albany, New York, which is actually the capital of New York.
I know, hard to believe. I don't know why that happened, how that happened, but yes, Albany is the capital of New York State.
Yes. And actually, Alan Manley, who I'll be introducing shortly, he is actually from New York State as well. He's from Westchester, which is actually just a little south of Albany.
So why did you choose Alan Manley to be on your call today? First of all, he doesn't sound very Italian.
He's not Italian. So I met him recently actually at a portfolio tasting for Planner Selections in New York City. This was in the end of March, this past March. And I had the opportunity to taste his Barolo and his Barolo Chinato and was just completely blown away. But not only about his wine, but about his story. So he is an expat who moved to Piemonte to follow his passion for wine. And he had these incredible experiences with who he's worked for and how it's led him to where he is today. So I'm very excited for him to share his journey. I think it's very unique and not one that we hear all the time when it comes to Italian wine producers. So definitely excited to get into that.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to that as well. So what should we expect from you today in terms of learning objectives?
Yeah, so I believe that Alan is the perfect example of working hard and following your dreams. I think his passion and love for Italian culture has driven him to where he is today. So I'd love for our listeners to feel inspired and driven to do the same.
It sounds so romantic. Wait, I have some special effects for that. Hold on.
Okay.
Okay. I never used that before. So,
Perfect.
That's perfect. So, Brittany, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to actually mute myself, and I might actually have to end early. Hopefully, Leica is coming here on time to close up the room, but
Okay.
we'll figure it out. Okay.
Okay, yeah.
So, over to you, Brittany.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much, Stevie. Okay, so today I am introducing Alan Manley, and I'm very excited to do so. Alan Manley began annual visits to the Barolo region in 1995, 2 years before opening the Colorado Springs restaurant Primitivo with a 2,200 selection wine list. He began coming to the Barolo region for harvests in 2007, working for 2 to 3 months with a different winemaker each vintage to learn the subtleties of each producer's methods. In 2011, he moved to the area permanently, first working in the cellar of Luciano Sandrone, and then at the Bartolo Mascarello and Cavalato wineries. 2012 saw his first production of an experimental quantity of wine from a 1,000 square meter vineyard on the Pernano Hill in Castiglione Folletto. In 2015, his vineyard holdings expanded enough to incorporate as an Azienda Agricola, and commercial production of Barolo began, with 2,800 bottles made in that first 2015 vintage year. In 2019, Langhe Nebbiolo was added to the production. Currently, the winery farms nearly 5 hectares of land and produces Barolo, Langhe Nebbiolo, and a small amount of Chinato. Mass production for the small Margarita Cantina is 12,000 bottles from Barolo and 12,000 bottles Langhe Nebbiolo each vintage. So without further ado, welcome Alan Manley.
Hi, Brittany. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much for your time. I so appreciate it. So I have a few questions to get going. And the first thing I'd love to start out with is why Barolo?
Great question. I just love it. I've always been fascinated with it. My father is a huge wine collector. His father was a huge wine collector. I began tasting from my father's glass when I was 4 or 5 years old. And so my palate developed early, let's say, itty bitty sips. But Barolo was one of those things that when I first tried it, it grabbed me. It grabbed me by the shirt and said, pay attention. And that's what brought me down this road.
That is so fantastic. I can completely relate to it grabbing you, by the shirt, but also by the soul, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm in total awe of the teachers you've had since you've been to Barolo time. Please share a bit about that and how that has led you to make the leap into your own label.
In 2007, I began coming for the harvests. But in 2007, I didn't really have a plan. I just kind of arrived and flitted from producer to producer, helping where I could. In 2008, I was here in the spring, in March, and Luciano Sandrone had become a friend over 10 years of visits. And at my restaurant, I sold his wine. And we had lunch together that day and with his daughter, Barbara, who was about my age. And he said to me, Alan, you understand something about wine and you understand something even about Barolo. But if you really want to understand it, you have to learn to make it. And then he said something to Barbara in Piedmontese. And she says, my father thinks you should come for the harvest and work in the cellar with him, which was this incredible opportunity. And of course I said yes and cleared the schedule. And I came over for about 10 weeks in the fall of 2008. And every day, except Sundays, which were off days, I was in the cellar with Luciano or picking or whatnot. I just soaked it all up. That was what got me started.
Are you enjoying this podcast? There's so much more high-quality wine content available from Mama Jumbo Shrimp. Check out our new wine study maps, our books on Italian wine, including Italian Wine Unplugged, The Jumbo Shrimp Guide to Italian Wine, Sangiovese Lambrusco and Other Stories, and much, much more on our website, mamajumboshrimp.com. Now back to the show.
So you can't see me, Alan, but I'm totally smiling throughout this whole story. That is just so amazing. That is just such an incredible experience that not every winemaker can say.
No, and it was an incredible opportunity. And, I consider Luciano my second father.
Wow.
Even after I was making my own wines, I could call him at 2 a.m. if there was a problem with the ferment. And he'd pick up the phone and he'd tell me, first thing he'd tell me is that I'm an idiot and laugh and then tell me what I needed to do. And he always gave great advice. And I really owe a lot to him.
That is so incredible. Do you still maintain relationships with Barbara?
Yes, absolutely. Luciano passed a year and a half ago. It was a great loss for all of us. But I still talk to Barbara and Luca and still stop in every now and then to see them. And they've been nothing but supportive of my efforts here.
That's very special. So I'm very curious how you acquired your 3 parcels in Monforte di Alba, Castiglione Folletto, and Serralunga di Alba, because I know that can be difficult to secure as a producer just starting out. So what was that process like?
Well, a lot of it is just luck and being in the right place at the right time and just grabbing the opportunity when it's in front of you, because it won't stay. If you wait a day, it'll be gone. The first parcel that I got was the piece in Pernano of Castiglione Folletto, which was 1,000 square meters, which is about maybe a quarter acre of old vine Nebbiolo that was on a hill so steep that you couldn't use a tractor on it. Everything had to be done by hand, and the family that owned it I'd known for about 15 years, and they said, oh, just let the American have it. He can play. And I brought these old plants back to health, because it was such a difficult spot to farm. They didn't do much more than a pruning and then coming back at harvest and picking what was there, if there was anything. But the plants were beautiful. And in a way, it allowed me to apply at a practical level everything I'd been learning when I worked, as I said, originally with Luciano Sandrone, and then I did an experience at the Bartolo Mascarello winery. Then I was with Altare. I was with the Cavallotto brothers. And then the last one I did a kind of internship stage with was Marco Marengo in La Mora.
That is so incredible, especially about the Pernano Hills. I mean, that's so funny how they just said, How about you take it over?
Well, it's really a hard piece of land to farm. It's so steep, everything has to go in and out on your back.
Wow.
And so, when I wanted to give treatments to the vines, I had to mix up a tank that I put on my back and walked through the vineyards. And the really brutal thing is that the access road was not at the bottom, it was at the top.
Oh my
which
gosh.
meant that at harvest time, you put these 20-kilo crates of grapes on your shoulder and you walk up an incredibly steep hill. I would regularly lose 2 or 3 kilos on the day of harvest. And when that rental contract finally ran out and they saw the nice work I'd done and they said, oh, we're going to take it back, my heart was heavy, but my back was happy.
Absolutely. In more ways than one.
Yep. And then the other parcels, to finish your question, sorry,
Yes.
I got a little
No, please.
distracted there. In Monforte d'Alba, that's actually a parcel I own. A friend of mine from Colorado decided to buy a house here. And after he'd bought the house, the folks he bought the house from said, oh, do you want to buy the vineyard next to it? He's not a winemaker, but he said, hey, why don't we buy this together? So we bought it together. That's a half hectare. And then in Serralunga, that's a family I've known for about 20 years. They have about 8 hectares of vines. They only sell fruit. And starting in 2015, they began to sell me a tiny bit of fruit from a 3,000 square meter parcel at the base of the Rionda Hill, which is one of the most famous in the Barolo region. That's not something that I have under contract. We just have an agreement that I buy the fruit from them. But I got to say, they do an exceptional job growing fruit. Now I have other parcels as well in the Vignane and the Coste di Rose Menzione in the town of Barolo. I lost the piece in Castiglione Falletto, as I said, but I replaced them with 2 other pieces. And now they're the 4 vineyards that I put into the Barolo Assemblaggio that I make.
Excellent. So actually, speaking of the Barolo Assemblaggio, I'd like to get into knowing that you have this ancient method approach to your winemaking process. So I'd love to hear your perspective behind why you do this and how it separates your style amongst others.
That's a great question. The real reason is because that's the style of wine that I love to drink. When I first began coming to the Barolo in 1995, I had a good friend who wrote for a long out-of-print magazine called the Quarterly Review of Wine. I think it was a British publication. And he hand-wrote letters to his friends, who were Bruno Giacosa and Beppe Rinaldi, and said, my friend Alan is going to be in Italy. Help him understand Barolo. He already loves the wine. I'd already been buying those wines along with others of that style since I graduated from college in '86. In the 80s and 90s, Barolo wasn't the wine it is today. It wasn't as expensive. It was easy to find. You found it often on closeouts because people just didn't buy it, which is amazing to think. But that was the style of wine that moved me. And so when I moved here permanently in 2011, first I worked for Luciano, and then I part-time worked at the Cantina Bartolo Mascarello. When the contract with Luciano ran out, I went over to nearly full-time at Bartolo. And that's just the style of wine that I love, that integration of different things. And so when I decided to start making wine, it was in that style that I wanted to go.
Excellent. Yes, I mean, I was completely blown away by your Barolo when I tried it this past March, and it was just so beautifully done. It stood out to me amongst a sea of wine, so
Thank
it
you.
was very
I
well
really
done.
appreciate that. I realize here I'm just somebody who came along, and my wine is a tribute to the great winemakers who I admire. I don't put myself in their class at all, but I learned a lot from them. Many people here in the region were incredibly generous with their knowledge and sharing. And, I never studied enology. I learned to make wine by doing it. And so I didn't think it's appropriate for me to step in here and say, oh, let me show you how it's done. no, I learned from masters, and I'm trying in my small way to make something that respects the traditions and the history of this place.
Yes, that's so poetic, and I absolutely love that. And actually, that leads me into my next question: is what impact do you hope to have on the Barolo region, and what about your consumers elsewhere?
Well, me having an impact, zero. I'm not Italian. I don't have Italian blood. I came here because I love the wine. I hope that my wine is received well, and that people see that I'm trying to do something that's not. How do I say this? That's not mucking with something that's really good already. I just want to make a good wine. Nothing more than that.
Well, that's incredibly modest of you, and I definitely appreciate that perspective for sure. I think just your experiences with these teachers you've had is just so incredible, and just it's priceless. So it's very special that you are creating this wine that reflects that.
Well, when I started coming here, there wasn't a lot of interest in Barolo. And, after I'd knocked on people's doors for 4 or 5 years in a row, they realized, oh, this guy's serious. He keeps coming back. And as you mentioned in my bio, I had a restaurant for many years in Colorado Springs. And I sold a lot of these wines. And they appreciated that somebody who was presenting their wine to parts of the world that they never traveled to would come to see them to learn better what they were doing. So, I owe it to the people who opened those doors for me.
Absolutely. Do you think you have an interest in expanding beyond Nebbiolo?
No. I moved
No.
here for Nebbiolo. I'll tell you, I'm not a Dolcetto fan. I don't like working the plants. They're incredibly fussy, much more difficult than Nebbiolo. And then the wine just is not the reason why I moved here. I love Barbera, especially in a more traditional style, but my winery is tiny, and just knowing this is what I can produce, these 24,000 bottles a year, I'd have to have more tanks and different tanks, and then tanks where I put in Barbera versus tanks where I put in Nebbiolo. And it's already, let's just say the winery working in here is like working inside a three-dimensional Tetris puzzle. You're always looking, where can I fit this? Where can I put that? If I put this here, can I still move around here? There are a few pictures on my website of the winery, but you don't get a sense. They were taken a few years ago when there were fewer barrels, but you don't get a sense of how tight it is. In fact, my tanks that I use for fermenting Langhe Nebbiolo, after the ferment phase, and once the tanks are empty and the Nebbiolo goes into the large barrels, those tanks go outside. I don't have the space to keep them inside. And, I live on an incredibly steep hill, so there's no place to build a little warehouse. So I found a warehouse down at the bottom of the valley where anything that's not in use, I bring it down there because I need the space. So adding more grapes, no.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, I hope to be able to visit the winery sooner than later. I would love to see where the magic happens for sure.
Well, thank you. And on that note, I'm always open to visitors who are curious to learn and want to come to taste. It's just me. I have no employees. I have a labor cooperative that helps me in the vineyards, and a friend who helps for a couple hours a week during the harvest period. But other than that, it's just me. And so, I can't give tours all day, 7 days a week. But when I have time, I love having visitors.
Wow. Yeah, definitely the definition of a passion project.
Yeah, it is. I never thought I'd be a winemaker, even though I've worked with wine a large part of my life. And in fact, people I knew in the States that were winemakers, It's just not a model that I aspired to. Once I got here, I realized you don't have to make 120, 150,000 bottles of wine to break even. The economics here are different, and so it happened to work out. And again, it's not something when I moved here permanently in 2011 that I thought this is what I'm going to do. It just sort of happened organically.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Well, kind of going back to, you were saying how space is, and obviously geography as well, are some of your challenges. What else has been challenging in terms of being a relatively newer winemaker? Maybe vintages, etc.
Well, that's a great question. And, there are cultural issues. When I moved here, I already had a little apartment that I was using here in the town of Monforte. And I knew people, and people knew me. But once I moved here, there were some people who just were like, who is this guy? And what is he doing here? And it took a while for especially some of the older folks in the village to accept me, but now they've become, friends. They give advice. Many of them worked in the vineyards for years, but the first couple of years was definitely a struggle to get to know people. Obviously, language is a barrier. I had to learn Italian. When I arrived here, my Italian was rudimentary at best. I'd done a 6-month course of study. Intensive course of study in the language in, when was it, 2004. But, you have to use it constantly to really get to know it. After I moved here, I met Daniela, who's now my wife, and she is from Alba, and she teaches at the Liceo Linguistico in Alba. So she's a stickler for grammar and has been a great support on that side, and also helping me understand nuances of language. Just an amazing person. I feel like I won the lottery there too as well.
I had the pleasure to meet your wife at the tasting, and I could definitely,
yep.
yes. So I could definitely back you up on, she is very lovely indeed.
Yep. And her family has owned vines in Barbaresco for years and years and years. Her family's not a winemaking family. It's just always been part of the family holdings, or the family's, I don't know what you want to say, properties. And for years, they have been members of Produttori del Barbaresco, the famous cooperative in the village of Barbaresco that makes the amazing reserve wines. And they joined the cooperative in 1961. So they weren't part of the founders in 58, but they joined in 61. And a couple of years ago, my father-in-law came to me and said, the contract we have with our vineyard worker is running out. Would you mind taking over for us? Can we keep it in the family? And I was just like, well, it's an honor. Because, I've had the wines of Produttori for years. I had them at my restaurant Primitivo. My father had their wines in his personal cellar that we used to drink. And so now I also manage 2.5 hectares of vineyards in Barbaresco, and we still bring all the fruit to Produttori. For my wife's family, it's very important that they stay part of it. But I now have also that responsibility of making sure that the fruit that comes from their vineyards in Barbaresco is top quality and will go into the reservas.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah. That is such an honor.
Yeah. I mean, when he asked me, I was like, oh, gosh. Yes, sir, I'll do my best. Yeah. And then, I know people at Produttori because I've been buying the wines there for years. And so I went and talked to their chief agronomist, a lovely guy named Fabio Accomasso. And, we sat for about an hour, and he asked me about what I do in my vineyards in Barbaresco and what I do in terms of treatments and fertilization and picking, and when do I like to pick, and what are the parameters, and at the end of it he said, I think if you keep doing what you've done with your vineyards in the Barolo, we're not going to have any problems. And in fact, it's been a great relationship. And also there, Fabio on the agronomy side, and then maybe, I don't know if you ever met Luca Cravanzolo or Aldo Bacca, who are the, I don't know what you call that, chairman and vice chairman or president and vice president. They've been incredibly helpful also making sure that I bring them the best possible stuff.
Wow, that's amazing. So what would you like the future of Margarita Auto to look like?
Well, no different from how it is now. It has reached its maximum capacity in the cellar where I am now, which is underneath our home in Monforte. And last year, 2023, I hit that maximum capacity, which is 12,000 bottles of Langhe Nebbiolo and 12,000 bottles of Barolo. More than that, I don't have the space to put any more barrels in here. I don't have space to add more tanks for fermenting. Already during the harvest, once all the tanks come in for the ferments, you can barely move in on the ferment side of the cantina. So I'm really happy with where I am. I don't want to grow more. I in some ways I consider this my retirement project. I hope I can do this for another 20 years.
That's amazing. I mean, I like that you're okay with where you are as long as you're happy. I think that even adds to the wines, Happy
Well,
winemakers make good wines.
yeah, that's one way of looking at it. The other thing is, when you get big, you have to start delegating.
Yes.
And, at my size, I will never be able to compete on price or quantity. I can only compete on quality. And so being small allows me the luxury of saying no to a lot of things that you have to do when you get bigger. And I can just concentrate on the thing that I want to do, which is make a really good wine. And that's enough.
Can you tell our audience why you've named your label Margarita Auto?
Yes, those are my grandparents' names, Marguerite and Otto, my father's parents. And my father, Edward, was a big collector of Bordeaux and California cabs. His father, Otto, was a big collector of Burgundy, loved Burgundy. And so Otto was my grandfather, and Marguerite, my grandmother. She was from the French part of Switzerland. He was from Austria. And I put them together. I changed Marguerite to Margherita. I used the Italian. And then Otto is the number 8, which is on my label. And it's just ambiguous enough that it confuses people a little, especially native Italian speakers, because Margherita is also the daisy flower. And they look at it and they say, shouldn't it be otto margherite, 8 daisies? And no, it's Margherita Otto. So
I love that. I actually am
Thank you.
super curious how you came into connections with Polaner.
Oh, well, Doug and Polaner, I've known them for years because Doug is a huge Barolo expert. I have a lot of respect for his palate and his taste. My national importer in the U.S. is Rare Wine Company out of California, and they are distributed by Polaner in the New York area.
Very cool. Yes, I did have the pleasure to meet Doug at the tasting as well, and he is definitely a plethora of knowledge.
Oh, yeah. Lot of respect for Doug.
Love that. So my final question that I have for you today is, what would your advice be for those that are interested in following in a similar path to yours?
Whew. Advice. Good grief. It's a difficult path, especially for Americans, because it's not easy to get residence or work permits here. The first thing I'd say is learn the language, because people who come here and assume everybody speaks English, that is not the case. Learn the language. once you're here, it's hard to find work. Luckily, I'd been coming for years as a visitor. But you just got to put your head down and work really hard and keep your eyes and ears open and learn everything you can. A lot of the winemakers amongst themselves speak Piedmontese, which is a dialect that's in some ways closer to French than it is to Italian. So, having some French helps a lot too, especially when they start jabbering away in Piedmontese, which at first I couldn't follow at all, but now at least I can recognize some of the words. Advice, good grief. That's a tough question.
Well, what's something you wish you knew besides the language? What's something you wish you knew, when you first started Margarita Auto?
Well, yeah. I kind of put it together on a shoestring, and then once I realized the business was going somewhere, I sold properties I had in the U.S. to finance it. Make sure if you're going to start a business here that you're ready to go, because Barolo, you have 4 years of holding before you start seeing any income stream, and that's a long time because you're paying farming costs, you're paying inventory costs. It's not the easiest thing to do. The bureaucracy around wine is considerable. We're in northern Italy, and there are rules and regulations, and people who arrive and think, oh, it's Italy, anything's possible, you're going to get slapped around, and you're going to get yourself into trouble. You got to follow the rules. Finding vineyards is very difficult. Finding a space to vinify is incredibly difficult because there are also rules about that. And, you have to be in a certified space that gets inspected. I get 2 or 3 inspections a year for different things in the winery, in the vineyards, bottle counts, barrel counts. You have to maintain registries at a government site that must be accurate. There can't be any fooling around. You have to come into this with utmost seriousness. And if you try to say, well, that's not how we do it in America or England or Switzerland or anything, whatever it is, you're not going to make yourself look good. You have to be respectful of the process.
Absolutely. Do you think there's a part of the Italian culture that maybe you didn't know before that you fully embraced and, you'll never look back?
That's a really interesting question. Of course, there are incredible differences between American culture and Italian culture. And I'm 59 years old. I'm not going to change. I'm never going to turn into an Italian. I love living here, but I'm not trying to be something I'm not. And I'm kind of a precise, I like to work hard. And there are things about the culture certainly that are very different from ours, but in those, I have to learn to not be as rigid as I can be in some ways, because I'm the one who chose to come here. They didn't invite me,
Right.
so it's up to me to make the effort. I mean, that was the same thing when I first arrived here. I was a little shy, but then I realized, oh, they're just as shy as I am, so I'm the one who has to break the ice. And so, I lived in Colorado for many years. I grew up just north of New York City, as you mentioned in the intro. But I lived in Colorado for many years. And, there was just a thing on the roads as you're driving around. You see somebody, you wave, which when I first got to Colorado was really strange, but I got into that habit. And so, I do it here. And now people wave back. It took a couple years till they realized, like, oh, yeah, it's that guy. And, I feel like a member of the community here in Monforte. Maybe someday I'll apply for Italian citizenship and be able to vote as well. But for the moment, I'm still l'americano. And people call me that sometimes. I'll walk into a coffee bar and they're like, l'americano, come stai?
That's great. Do you think that you would be open to giving someone the opportunity that your mentors had given you at your, with your winery though?
Yeah. In fact, in a small way, that just happened. My nephew, who just finished his first year of college in Los Angeles, called me up and said, can I come work with you for a couple weeks? I really want to see what you do and what it means to work in a winery. I mean, that's one experience. But if somebody came to Italy and, asked me, can I come work for a couple weeks? Can I do an internship? Of course, the difficulty is just the permits. For Americans, that's incredibly difficult. And, I'm the foreigner. I already have a target on my back. I get lots of inspections. I am not going to risk my business to play fast and loose with the rules.
Right.
So, there are actual barriers to doing that. I was talking with another winemaker who was saying, well, a couple of years ago, they put in a rule to allow you to do short-term hires to give young people experience. But to qualify for this type of contract, you have to go to 13 or 14 different offices and get them to sign off on it before you can actually hire that person.
Wow. Yeah. So it's not easy.
It's not easy. And that's for a 6-month position, essentially. Unfortunately, the reality is that it's not easy for people to come over here and just pick up work. And I'm sure you're going to ask me next is, how did you manage to do it? And I did it because I'm a dual citizen with Switzerland. My parents are both Swiss. And Switzerland is part of the Schengen group, which allows for the free movement of people. So it literally took me, and I please don't take this the wrong way or that I'm bragging, it literally took me 10 minutes to get residence and work permits.
Wow.
That's how easy it is if you're a Schengen citizen.
Wow. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
I wasn't familiar with that. Great. Well, that's all the questions I have for you today, Alan. I'm so incredibly grateful for your time and for this opportunity. This has just been so fabulous to learn more about you and share with our audience here in the Italian Wine Podcast, and just to get you more familiarized.
Yeah, and if there are any...
Sorry, that might have
Cheering.
come in a little earlier than I had anticipated.
I don't know if there's anybody else in the room that has questions. I don't know if you can open up this. It's my first experience doing an online podcast like this, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that others may have as well.
I always have lots of questions.
Excellent.
Never met, but so are there any other American winemakers like yourself, in specifically to Piemonte, but in general, someone like yourself, like who started from
wine.
scratch, who's making wine, one-man show?
No, and somebody that started from nothing instead of buying a winery. A lot of people come to visit, say, who did you buy this winery from? Which is a legitimate question because the barriers to entry to making Barolo are considerable. But, it grew from 1,000 square meters and making the experimental wine in a little cellar under the apartment I had. My landlady, where I used to live before my wife and I bought this house, said, if you clean out the cellar, it was an old cow stable and that's where I made the first wines. Just experiments. I had no pump. I had no destemmer. Everything was done by hand. When I wanted to pump over, I did it with buckets. You got to be willing to put in the sweat equity.
This is kind of a cheeky question, but in a blind tasting, would you be able to recognize your Barolo? And if yes, what are the differentiators? Like, how do you know it's your wine?
What an interesting question. I'm pretty sure I could recognize it. When I was younger, when I owned the restaurant, I did a lot of blind tasting. When reps would come to sell wine, I wouldn't let them pour without it being blind. So all my staff learned to love blind tasting. What I always note in my wine is a hint of blood orange peel in the nose, which is not really typical for Barolo, but I think comes from the site in Monforte. And the reason I think that is that it's a site that's a little different from the others. It's a much higher elevation, and in certain years it ripens much, much later. And I can't do the usual assemblaggio tradizionale, whereby I mix the fruit from the different sites together already in the fermentation tank. So in some vintages, where it ripens maybe 2 or 3 weeks later than everything else, I have to ferment it separately. And what I note when this is fermenting is these notes of especially pomegranates and blood oranges. And so I think that's something that makes my wine distinctive. It's not for everybody. The other thing that I can say is that the most important picking decision for me is, are the seed tannins ripe? And by that, I mean that are they fully lignified in the seed? When I crunch down on a seed between my teeth and I take out the pieces, if I see any green in there, I'm not picking, even if the weather report says we're going to have a week of rain starting tomorrow, because I know the wine's going to turn out bad. For me, it's absolutely critical that the seeds are ripe. I don't know if that answers your question, but those are two things that I always look for in my wine and are kind of like the calling card.
And does that distinctive note translate into the palate as well?
Not so much in the palate. It's more the nose. Blood oranges in the palate would make a very atypical Nebbiolo. It happened one year where in 2017, which was an incredibly difficult vintage year, and when the wine came out of the ferment tanks, it just smelled of blood oranges and pomegranates, and I hated it. I was ready to sell it in bulk, but I have a good friend who's an enologist, and he said, put it in the barrel and see what happens. And it took a year and a half to shed that, but what came out, I couldn't be happier with the wine. From an incredibly difficult vintage, it's not my best wine, but I will say it's the wine I'm the most proud of.
So in the show notes, I see that your maximum capacity is 12,000 bottles for both Barolo and Yolanghe Nebbiolo. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep.
And what about your other wines, Vino Rosato and Vino Rosso?
Well, Vino Rosso were my experiments before I incorporated as an Azienda Agricola. And those were only made in 2012, 13, and 14 from that 1,000 meter plot that I had in Castiglione, Faletto.
Which is very high, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, that one, not as high as some of the others, but the wines turned out really quite well. And I sold them as Vino Rossos, as an everyday table wine, even though they were made from Barolo vineyards according to Barolo rules and standards. Right. The Rosato I make for my wife. I make 200 bottles a year.
That's so cute.
I have a little steel barrique, and I take some bleed wine off the Barolo after about 36 to 40 hours of skin contact, when it's gotten a little bit of color, but not tons. And I let it ferment off the skins. And then I block the mallow because I like the bright acidity. And then I put it into a steel barrique for 1 year to let it settle. And then I bottle it by gravity by hand. Mm-hmm. And I put it in a bottle with a crown cap, a beer cap, because it's something I only give away. I don't sell this wine at all.
Well, if you're only making 200 bottles.
Yeah, so it's a kind of friends and family wine. Mm-hmm. My wife doesn't drink 200 bottles of it, but we enjoy a couple. In general, I don't drink my own wine for enjoyment. I need to maintain a critical stance toward it. I don't want to become accustomed to it in a way that I would stop trying to make it better. So the Rosato is the only wine that I really drink for pleasure at all of my own wines.
Okay. And what about the Vino Rosso that you only had in the older vintages? Do you still have some bottles?
I have, I think, 6 magnums of each and maybe 2 or 3 bottles. That's it.
How do they stand now, like your first vintages?
Well, 2012, I never released. I sold the 13 and the 14. The 2012, it was a delicate wine to begin with, and, it just didn't meet the qualitative standard that I wanted. So that wine actually went into the Chinato, some of it.
Okay.
The 13 and 14 I sold to some of my customers who wanted, a decent everyday wine. And that's what it was. It was essentially a Barolo that had been brought up, it was brought up in a tonneau instead of a large cask. So you sense the wood a little bit because I didn't have enough wine to fill up a large cask. But, they were perfectly good wines. Some people loved them. They were like, why don't you keep making that? And I said, well, because now I make Barolo. But yeah, I was happy with those wines. They showed me that I could make something drinkable.
So, we didn't really talk very much about your winemaking style, but we have a few minutes. Can you just tell us general philosophy of your winemaking?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I work in a traditional method, which means I make only a Barolo. And it's not a single vineyard, which is now very much the fashion. This is Barolo like it was made 50 or 70 or 100 years ago. You have to think that the idea of single vineyard Barolos really only began in the 1970s and really took hold only in the 1980s. It's a Burgundian model, but I think there's enough history here in the Piedmont that we don't have to look to Burgundy for everything. And in fact, the wines that I love are usually these, what are either blended Barolo or assemblaggio. And I want to stress that here, those two terms mean different things. There are a lot of wine writers and journalists who use assemblaggio and blend interchangeably. But here they mean different things. A blended Barolo you make from finished wines where you separate the fermentations. So you make this cru in one tank, another cru in another, and after they're finished wines, you mix them together. And assemblaggio tradizionale, you are mixing the fresh fruit and co-fermenting the different vineyard sites together.
Right.
So that's super traditional. I use concrete tanks for my Barolo. That's also a very traditional vessel that has fallen out of favor, now is making a comeback. But for me, that's just always been the best for making Barolo. I do long macerations for my Barolo, usually a total of 35 to 50 days with submerged cap of skin maceration, and then 2.5 years in large oak barrels. I don't use barriques. My casks are between 1,000 and 5,000 liters, and they're made to impart a neutral effect on the wine.
Okay. So what about in terms of yeast?
Yeast is native yeast, but I'm not, as we say here, talibano about it.
Right.
I always buy a packet of yeast that I keep in the fridge in case there's a problem. I had to use some yeast in 2017 and again in 23, both incredibly hot, dry years where I believe the yeast that came in from the vineyards were just so weakened by the conditions that they never got a good start to the fermentations. Luckily, now we have a local yeast that's been propagated, and we have to tip our cap to Roberto Conterno at the Giacomo Conterno winery. He had some research done years ago in Cascina Francia, his famous vineyard in Serralunga. Mm-hmm. He had a yeast survey done, and they found the native yeasts and isolated them. Apparently there were 3 one of them was always the dominant yeast strain. And so you can now buy packets of this. And that's what I always have in the fridge. And if I need it, I need it. If not, I put it in the compost heap after the harvest is done.
Okay, and my very last question, because we are coming to the hour. I don't really see you on social media. So in a way, I feel like you're a true Piemontese. More than American. Is this because you're a one-man show or you're against social media? What is going on?
I just have no interest, and my day is already full, and I don't want to have one more thing to be thinking about. I'll say this. I'm entering my grumpy years, right? I'm 59, so I'm in the bah humbug stage of my life.
Right. At least
I'm saying that with a smile, but I have my website, and that's enough. I don't even like getting emails on my phone. I just don't want to be that connected.
How do people get in touch with you? Because we have bunch of ambassadors like Brittany who want to visit you. So how do we make that happen? I know you're a one-man show. You do have a website, so there is an email. Do you read your
you can go to the website. Yes, I do. I read them all. And I really try to respond to everything. Right. But emails are better because, the phone here at the cantina rings in the office, but if I'm in the vineyards or the cantina, I don't hear it. So if you want to come to visit, like I said, visits are appreciated. I love them. And just send an email and tell me when you're going to be in town and give me some flexibility to fit you into the schedule. Usually at max, I take 1 or 2 a day. And don't come during the harvest, please.
Yeah, of course. It's a good show to wrap at this time. Thank you so much, Brittany. Great job. Good.
Thank you.
I have to be honest, I've been in the wine business for 12, 13 years now, very vertical on Italian wine, and I had never heard of Margherita Alto. So thank you for bringing Alan to us today. I really appreciate it. Very fascinating and very original story as well. So thank you for that, Brittany. And Alan, thank you so much for your time and joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Alan.
Yeah, I don't know if you listen
Brittany.
to pods, but when we drop the pod, we'll get it to you by email. Okay.
Thank you. That's very kind of you.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Ciao, ragazzi.
Take care. Grazie. Ciao.
Listen to the Italian Wine Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We're on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Himalaya FM, and more. Don't forget to subscribe and rate the show. If you enjoy listening, please consider donating through ItalianWinePodcast.com. Any amount helps cover equipment, production, and publication costs. Until next time, cin cin.